Welcome to this episode of The Interviews. I'm Steve Kutie. Today's special guest, Nick Pernokas, saddle builder extraordinaire, roper, actor, author, screenwriter, storyteller.
I think you hit on most of it right there.
That's about it. That's enough.
But
I almost had to have the scroll sheet.
My day job list isn't quite as long as that, but
No,
that's
right,
okay.
right. So we want to just where do we want to start? We'll let you lead us down this path.
You got to start with Once Upon a Time, but I don't really know where you want to start. Where do you want to start?
I guess let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
Right. In a land far, far away.
Yeah, it was. It was.
You grew up not in Texas.
Right.
You grew up in.
Well, I was raised in Rhode Island, and I grew up along Narragansett Bay, which is about as far from cowboy country as you can get. But there were a few cowboys there, and like a lot of guys my age, John Wayne sort of influenced me a little bit. It was really Will James. When I went to the school library, I read all the Will James books, and they really showed me what being a cowboy really was. And you'll find him come up in a lot of people's resumes. And so the Will James, and I kind of got in. I wanted to ride, so I used to work at a hack stable, and all of a sudden I just decided I wanted to ride when I was a little kid, and I'd go over there and clean stalls, and they'd let me ride a little bit and let me hang around, and I had that gig for a while, and they finally wore out, and they just they were worried about having me around all the time and getting hurt or something, I guess. And so I had a paper route, and I saved up the money and bought my first horse, which was an American quarter horse. When I did that, I wanted to learn how to ride better because he kept bucking me off, and I found this lady that was a dressage teacher. So she basically taught me dressage. I didn't have an English saddle, but I rode a Western saddle, and she made me post without stirrups till my knees were bloody and the blood soaked through my jeans. She was a pretty good disciplinarian. The best thing was I still wanted to be a cowboy, so the dressage didn't really do it. Her husband was a really good calf roper, PRCA calf roper in Rhode Island, Jack Renaud. And Jack was a mentor to me. I started going over there and roping the dummy in the winter, all winter. I mean, not very many had indoor arenas up there at that time period. And we'd rope in his garage all winter, the dummies, and he had a dummy horse you could rope off of and get off. He had some calves. We'd bring them in the garage and tie them. He was out on a farm, so this is a rural garage. It wasn't like in your suburbs. But his brother Jack was a horseshoer, and his brother Richie Renaud was a horseshoer, and Richie still ropes calves. And so that was really how I got into getting towards the dream of being a cowboy. As I got into that stuff, one of your friends, Larry Mahan, was an influence on me when I was a kid. I had his poster up in my room from Justin Boots when he did the Justin Boot posters. But that's sort of how I got started.
How did you end up going from there to Texas? Is that how your path went? Did you go straight from there to Texas?
Well, actually, with Will James, I wanted to go to Montana, so that was my first thought. But I really got into roping, and all the ropers were down here. During the summers, I worked at a cutting horse trainer, just cleaning stalls, and I got to saddle some of the cutting horses and warm them up, and that was about it. I was showing my horse by then. I'd gotten good enough to where I was showing my horse in youth activity in the quarter horse shows in the New England area. And so I worked for this cutting horse trainer, and Doug Carpenter, who recently passed away, was working there. He was breaking colts for this guy at the time. And he was sort of like me. He was horse crazy, and he worked at a lime plant and had horses, and he went to work for Jack. So Jack had a trainer working for him that had been down to Texas, and he'd gone to Tarleton State University, and he worked for Lanham Riley. And so he told me all kinds of stories about Tarleton and the roping you could do, and all the stuff that went on. So eventually, when I got out of high school, I just headed west, and I went to Tarleton.
Well, Stephenville is the cowboy capital, right?
Yeah, it is. And back then it really was. So that's how I ended up in Texas.
So I know being down in Stephenville, they have isn't the team roping headquarters down there?
It was.
It's not anymore?
No, it recently moved. It's sold, and it's not there anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah. So you grew up roping, and then you moved to Texas. I mean, did you make a living roping when you got down here? I mean,
No.
has the horse business been, you know, kind of your big money maker? I know, we know you build saddles, right?
Yeah.
That's how originally I knew you, from the Rainer magazine.
Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah.
and then we've kind of become friends from there. But you know, was it just how did you become the cowboy that you dreamed to be? How did that become?
It was a slow process because I didn't have much natural ability, but I had a lot of try. I came down here and I didn't have a truck at first. I rode some bulls and hitchhiked and ran around like that for a few months. And I had a truck down here, and I finally had a roping horse down here. And I started roping, but everybody was way ahead of me on the roping spectrum, so I learned a lot, but it was hard getting going. And you know, I gradually progressed, and I had an old mare that I've talked about earlier. I bought her, and that's a whole different story, but she was really good to me. I started going to a lot of the little smaller rodeos around the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and but I never made a living from that. I graduated from college with a degree in animal science, which at the time was really, there weren't too many places to go. There weren't places that I wanted to go. So, and I got married. My wife was in a hunter jumpers, so Lindy. So while I was going to school, we broke colts up in Gordon, and we still, I'd gotten away from the showing horses, but in the 80s I got back into it, and I was sort of showing horses and going to rodeos and selling a few horses, but I needed something else to make entry fee money, and I went to work for Calvin Allen Saddlery. And I'd done a little leather work when I was in high school. I think a lot of guys do. They get the first handy belt kit and they stamp out a few things because they like the West, and that was what I'd done, but I really didn't have any experience in it. I worked for Calvin for a few years, and we were still breaking colts, and Lindy worked down there too. And you know, my goal was to get out of there and just show horses and just rope and do all that. It was a golden age of horse showing then, in the 70s in Texas, and that's what I wanted to do. And so when we left Calvin Allen's, I wanted to just have a little repair shop, but people kept bringing saddles in. They said, well, can you build this or could you build that? So that's really how I got into saddles, and the first saddles I built were mostly cutters. But I was doing a lot of business with ropers and with people at the horse shows that I was showing horses with. So gradually I ended up doing more reining saddles and roping saddles. And I gravitated away from the cutting saddles because at the time there were so many good cutting saddle makers here in Texas. You know, there were a lot of them, and they're all building a lot of saddles, but there weren't as many good saddle makers making reining saddles. The reining saddle hadn't really gotten specialized yet. And there weren't as many people, only a few guys making really good roping saddles. And so that's where I gravitated to because I really knew about those things. I've been around reining when I was a kid. Reining really started in the Midwest and the East Coast, and I was around a lot of those guys, and I sort of played at it, but I wasn't ever serious with it like I was with the rope.
Right. Let me ask you a question. So you were riding colts, you say, back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
What were you getting for riding a colt for 30 days in the 70s?
I don't remember. I think it was like $300 or something.
Inflation, huh?
Yeah. And we had some nice ones we rode for people. And we got some from back east because we were from back there and people remembered me when I was a kid up there. So, But I didn't want to just keep riding colts either. You know, I wanted to show and train horses, and we worked up and bred a few brood mares for pleasure and halter, but the roping was always the thing I wanted to do, and that's what I really pursued. So as the saddle making, as I progressed as a saddle maker, and it's just like anything else, you learn all the time. I'm still learning. It's just like being a horseman, and I got pretty well known and respected in both the reining and the roping fields, and that business was really good. It didn't give me as much time to work on roping. I had time to train horses, I didn't have time to go and rope with people and do all the stuff that a guy needs to do to be competitive. So that's why I stayed with the horse shows for a long time, because I could go beat somebody with a real pretty run, but I couldn't do that at a rodeo. I had to be in there, tying and roping, and I didn't think I had enough of a shot at the rodeo, so I stuck with the horse shows.
And that was originally with tie down.
Yeah, tie down,
roping.
and then.
Right.
Then later, my business started. And during the '90s, I had 3 people working for me, and it was a tough deal. We're always behind, but gradually, I started getting more time to pursue the roping too, and so I started working on myself more. And I finally got my PRCA card and cracked out back at the rodeos like I'd started, and did that for a few years until I was sort of starting to get crippled up from some horse wrecks and things like that, and I had to quit the calf roping.
Did you ever make it to that far?
Oh, no.
Close?
No, I got close to the Mountain State Circuit Finals one time. That was about it. I did win some at the PRCA rodeos and got my name called, but I did well at the jackpots. The U.S. Calf Roping Association was going along well then. I won a lot there, and eventually some of the senior pro rodeo things, and that I got my name called and won a little bit. The quarter horses, I always kind of stayed on the fringe of that. I won 2 reserve world championships and 5 high point year-end titles, which they called the honor roll back then, and with the roping. But it was always I always liked the rodeo, and I felt privileged to have been able to go do that. I roped at Pendleton and Cheyenne and places like that's part of the cowboy dream.
Yep.
And I didn't win anything at either. I almost made the short go at Pendleton, almost as like hand grenades in rodeo. I had to be 12 on my second one, and I had a borrowed horse that only ran in a straight line, which I didn't know. So it was great on the first run, but the second run the calf went left. And but the dream was getting to go all those places and do that and experience it, and that was a big deal for me.
I think the cool thing is when you look back at how the journey began, and how you worked your way up through it. And man, I knew that you roped, but I didn't know that you were into the show aspect of it. Because down here where we live, I assume you've been at pretty much the same place in Stephenville the entire time. You've been in the same general area.
Yeah, pretty much.
And is that, to be successful or semi-successful, down here speaks volumes, right? Because I've always said in this area, and it's maybe a fictitious number that I made up, but I like to say like 70% of the top trainers in the horse world live within like 100 miles of here. When you look at the rodeo guys that are all down in Stephenville, and then you get the Rainers up in Tioga, and Gainesville, Pilot Point, Aubrey, over here in Dubuque, they're coming this way a little bit. There's just so many good people that to win, you have to have a certain level of talent, right? So it's easy to say, I wasn't good, but the thing is there's a difference between being good here and being good somewhere else, right? Because the good here could turn you into being great somewhere else.
Yeah, well, this is a good place to be from if you rope, but it's a hard place to make a living, and it's become that way in the team roping as well. But I used to rodeo in the summers, and I'd go to Wyoming and Montana and Colorado because they had little rodeos that added less money, so you get a lot of guys from their circuits up there, but you wouldn't get all the big boys, but you'd still get somebody up there. You'd see some guy that was really tough that was in the standings, and he'd be at some little $500 added rodeo where he might win $200 or $300, but there's so many guys down here that could rope. And it's not to say those guys running less ropers, but when you have 150 guys and 100 of them are some of the toughest guys around that you've never heard of, and generally there's 2 or 3 head of livestock in a pen that they're going to win everything on. They're the best ones for those conditions, and that a lot of those guys are going to draw those calves several times. It makes the odds of beating somebody down here, even for the toughest guys, the odds are tough down here, but they can win more money when they do. If you sneak off somewhere else, you still have those kind of competitors, but you don't have as many of them to beat on those heads of livestock.
Yeah.
So it's tougher here, but you can get better here. It's harder to get better, or it used to be. Things have changed, as we said, with video and all that. Schools, people travel more.
Yeah, I mean, you're forced into being good if you want to survive down here.
Yeah.
And, I mean, so kudos to everybody that's made a living down here in the horse biz, because this is where it's at.
Yeah,
And, I mean, you don't necessarily have to be the best, but I mean, if you're in the mix down here and surviving and carving out a living for yourself in the horse biz, whether it's making saddles or roping, reining, whatever it may be, I mean, that's enough of a thing. It's one thing to be a big fish in a small pond, right? Then you come down here and I mean, everybody's kind of a minnow. Right, because I mean, you win the world today and tomorrow you don't win anything else. Nobody knows who you are.
Yep, exactly right. But the roping led to a lot of other things too. I sold a lot of saddles to ropers. Around 1992 or 3, I started making the Joe Beaver saddles because he was riding them, and he endorsed them for a few years. It's hard because I was in my arrangement. I had to do it with merchandise, and most of those guys are needing money, and he was constantly approached by other people, but he did ride my saddles. A horse trainer named J.D. Tadlock sold a lot of saddles for me, and he trained a lot of the top horses that went to the finals back in those years. So he was putting those saddles on his horses, and people were seeing them and they were buying them for their horses. Chip Nost, who I'm sure you know, trained a lot of really good horses, and he sold a lot of saddles for me, and I made him 3 saddles. So being in that world and understanding that keeping a horse going, training horses, really helped me sell saddles in that time period.
Well, I mean, you think it makes it better because you knew what you needed because you were competing and what those guys were looking for, and what the demands were, rather than kind of just building saddles because you wanted to make a check. Right. I think that makes the bigger difference.
Yeah.
And so how do you go from moving down here, riding colts, doing ropes, rope horses, going into building saddles, and then get into the acting and the movies and the writing screenplays and writing books? And if you guys get a chance, look this one up. I'm sure, do you have a website?
Yes.
Okay. What is it?
PernokasSaddlery.com.
Pernokas.
And that book's available there, but you can find it on Amazon, and there are several other.
I don't know if you can see that one. If you can see that one good.
It's all the pretty saddles, and it's a primer on how to evaluate a modern saddle. It's not about antique saddles, and it's not why you should buy one of my saddles. It's just how to evaluate a saddle, new or used, what to look for the level you want to shop at.
What's this thing retail for?
$25 for me. It's just retail price.
Not $24.99.
Not $24.
If you buy it through GHN, I get it for you. $24.99. Yeah. Just tag me.
I just like round numbers. Don't count so well.
I just like to be cheaper.
Yeah.
$24.99 sounds way better. Okay. And so then you get into the movie.
Well, the whole deal with this book I wrote the book in the 90s, and I wrote it on a Big Chief legal tablet, and I had a lady translate it onto a disc, and I marketed it around a few places, and I couldn't really, it was designed to sort of fit in with some of the instructional booklets of the time, and I couldn't really get it going. I mean, there wasn't another book like it on modern saddles, and so I self-published, and it did really well. We sold 1.5 books a day for the first year, all over the world: Israel, Germany, France, Italy. People
really,
you'd be surprised would be buying it. We're buying it, and then here, because I wrote it to answer all the questions that people were asking me when they'd call up, and I was getting constant calls about different simple things that are simple to me, but somebody that lives somewhere that isn't really they're just on the fringe of the horse world, or even trainers have been in it. There's a lot of old wives' tales about tack, and they'd call and ask me, and I'd say, no, it's this is what you need to look for, and this is how this works. So the book, this is the 4th edition, the 4th printing of it. Things have changed dramatically since it actually came out in '99, and since then, that was before cell phones, iPhones, and the internet wasn't quite as good. Now people read stuff off their phones, and books are sort of falling by the wayside. It's still selling, but people want something they can grab and read a couple of paragraphs when they're looking for a particular thing. Right. But anyway, what this did was I was a pretty good writer because I went to a really tough high school, and I had some really good writers as teachers. So I when the book came out, I had several people want me to write for the magazines. I wrote for Lanham Mangold, for Loops magazine, and then I wrote a few articles for Super Looper, and I wrote one or two for the Quarter Horse News and one for the Quarter Horse Journal, and I just sort of was picking along. And then a fellow named Dan Preston called me, and he had this magazine that was based in North Carolina. And at first he wanted to carry my book, and then he wanted me to write for him. So that was in 2001. I started writing for Dan, and Dan had been the publisher. He brought this magazine along from a little mimeograph sheet to a glossy covered magazine. And Dan knew everything there was to know about harness and boots and shoes, but he had a real hard time talking to, the Western saddle maker. He was from back there. He understood the Amish people loved him. He went in all their shops and auctions, and he understood all that. But so I started doing the Western stuff, and that just was really good for me. Dan, the magazine worked up, it got better and more circulation, better advertisers or more advertisers, and it did real well. And Dan, there were a few lean years with Dan, but then it took off, and he took really good care of me. He sent me all over the world to, if there was a story somewhere, he'd just send me to, say, France and say, well, I want a story on this group of individuals that are making saddles, but see what else you can dig up. And I'd try to dig up, I'd try to find the local stories that nobody'd ever hear of. So I was with them for a long time, and I did an article on a stuntman and this famous saddle he had, and he was trying to get together with, this is sort of getting ahead of it, this is getting into screenwriting, but he wasn't a very good writer, but he was a stuntman, and he and some other stunt people were trying to get together and do a Western movie. And he read the article, and he said, could you write a screenplay? And I said, I don't know, I've never tried. And so he got me, laid the screenplay on me. Well, I learned a lot about screenplays. I got paid for the first one, and then I did 2 rewrites that I didn't get paid for. And the project never materialized. But Bob Mizorowski, who was a producer of Tombstone, was one of the people that was on this film, and he started mentoring me, and he taught me a lot about screenplays. So that was the screenplay deal that you were asking me. The other thing of that is that I was already, I'd gotten involved in movies through a folk singer that stayed at the ranch. Sometimes when he was down here playing, he was from Ohio, and he was friends with a lot of ropers, and he just asked me if he could stay one year. And he heard about a film that was casting cowboys in East Texas. It was a Western horror feature. And
it's a good combo.
Yeah, it was good. The West is a good place to put any story because it's a mythical place. It always has been, and you can tell any kind of story with it as a background. Mm-hmm. So I went there, and I ended up, I just had a lot of fun because I've always liked movies. And I was supposed to be there for one day, and I died really bad at 4:30 in the morning in this old town. It was 28 degrees, and I had an old period Western suit on. We had a fire in this old church to stay warm in between shoots, and I was just an extra. We got done with that. The director said, well, could you come back in the morning? I'm going to shoot an outdoor scene at 9 o'clock, and I could use you. And so I changed my clothes. I had a different cowboy suit on and did this day scene. And they said, well, could you come back? I want to do a close-up of you tonight, and I'll shoot it earlier. So that was 2:30 in the morning, and I got to vomit black blood in this main street. And I was telling you before, every time I'd vomit black blood in the street, I couldn't move because the cameras would have lost their frame of reference with the buildings around me. And there's a camera next to me on one side, and the director was next to me on the other side. Every time I'd do the blood, the girl would come over and wipe my face off and everything else, and then I'd have to swallow another big lick of it. And I got done, and I was kind of frozen, and they had 2 crew guys pick me up into a standing position. And when I did that, all these people were sitting around on the boardwalks that were done shooting for the day, and they all started applauding and clapping. And I felt like I had just tied a calf in 7. I mean, I was hooked. And one of the girls said, they're going to be shooting a reboot of Dallas, and I know the casting director. Would you be interested? I said, sure. So she gave me their card, and that's how I get into the film end of it. And the 2 have kind of dovetailed, and all this stuff comes together. I mean, the movie people and films have influenced the horse business so much, and the tack business, and they go back and forth through the years. They're all interwoven, so it's been kind of cool. It all ties together, and I sell leather products to people in the movies, and I write other stuff for magazines that, some of it's film related, screenplays, and If you don't mind me telling you about the screenplay, I've got one that right now that's in pre-production with a lady named Willow Hale out in Los Angeles. And Willow's a working actor, which is an actor that works all the time, as opposed to the big stars and then the actors that get to work a little bit. She works all the time. If you look at her IMDb page, there are lots of projects every year, and she was recently on a recurring character on Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I met her at a film festival, and she had an idea for a story about the way friendships are affected by the COVID epidemic and just the social media and the way people get fragmented now and they come apart. People have been friends for years. It's hard for them to stay friends. So she wanted a screenplay on that, and I wrote it. It won Best Short Screenplay at the Sunny Side Up Film Festival in Oklahoma last month. And she's got it in pre-production out there because she's done this before and she knows people in LA that'll produce stuff like this. But now I have to write more to it. You know, she wants more added to make it longer. Yeah. But that's sort of a fun deal. It's completely outside of my comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like we were talking about, you know, trying different things and learning. I've learned a lot because it's so different from any other kind of writing. And it's just like being in running off and joining the circus because you never know what's going to happen. Every day's a new day. You never know what kind of email you're going to get.
I mean, I guess my question, what I have a hard time wrapping my head around, is that when you're talking about writing screenplays, I mean, you're talking about the dialogue and the flow mm-hmm. and how all the pieces go down, yeah. And how do you get your head wrapped around the story, right, as far as the whole story, and then breaking it down on, you know, who's saying what and how all these pieces go down. I mean, how does that all go down?
Well, first of all, there's short films and then there's a feature film. Most feature films are so expensive to make that you need some pretty good investors to get the money up. The actual film, the story you're telling has to follow a particular structure, and the art of it is concealing that structure so people don't know that they're being told the same story. I mean, they've analyzed that there are only so many stories you can tell, but there are a lot of films and books out there, so you're trying to disguise what the story is in a way. With short films like we're doing here, there's less rules, and so it's where the pure art is. At these film festivals, you see work that's just like raw painting, and kids that are passionate about their work, and they're not hindered. They're working on it under a lot less restraint from money, financial stuff. So anyway, that's kind of not really answering the question, but with the short films and that, even, you know, I had to, going from magazine writing to doing a screenplay, I had to learn the format to put it in, and that's the hardest thing. I don't have any problems with actually writing the dialogue, I see the whole thing like a movie in my head when I sit down and write. Mm-hmm. And that's the way I do my magazine articles. They're usually about a real person or a real subject, but I try to make them entertaining to where people want to keep reading. So it's like you and I are sitting here and I'm telling you a story. That's all I do in the magazine. The film, I have to have it laid out in a particular format, and each scene has to be, each one has to be perfect, the headings on each one and the dialogue, and everything has to make sense. But you know, I have a program on my computer called Celtex that I use, and it doesn't really do it for you, but it lets you organize a little better. And I just see the scene, and once I start typing the dialogue in, dialogue's pretty easy for me. It's just like I'm watching the people. And a lot of times they go places. I have an idea of what I want to do, but sometimes once they're talking, they go places that I didn't expect them to. Right. So
I think that, I mean, that would be the difference between, you know, again, not bad-mouthing Quentin Tarantino, but that's probably how I tell a story.
Yeah.
Right. Jumps around a little bit crazy and erratic and doesn't really go the way you think it's going to go.
He's got a method to his madness, and he's a genius, and Pulp Fiction's one of my favorite films, and Reservoir Dogs. Those are two really good pieces of filmmaking.
And I had seen a documentary on it, and they're talking about how he was having a hard time, right, getting it to the studios and getting it produced because of the way it is, because it didn't make sense and it didn't follow the script that you were talking about, right? It didn't have that flow to it. But on the flip side of it is that's what turned it into such a big hit, right? Because it didn't follow the normal.
Yeah, and when you get to a level, he'd done some other work, and once you get to that level, it's a little harder for him to say no to you. But yeah, I mean, and he's had access to some really good actors, and he's got all the financial support he needs for the kinds of sets and things like that. But he's really talented. Not everybody likes his work. I think he's gone over the top in the last few films, maybe. You know, you can get to a point where you're overdoing it. But that's me. I'm really a nobody when it comes to the film deal. I don't want to criticize somebody who's really talented like that. Everybody's got their own perspective.
Yeah, it's again, right? We talked earlier, you know, the positions you get put in and how that goes. So now having written screenplays and done some acting at this point, and the roping and building saddles, did you think that's the way the trajectory goes?
Well, I never saw the film. I never saw the writing taking off like it did. I just was lucky that I fell in with Dan, because the Leather magazine has outlived a lot of other magazines, because we go to a traditional audience that wants a magazine to read. Mm-hmm. We're on the internet now too, but we still sell an awful lot of magazines. So I got really lucky there. The film deal is just like I said. It's I just like the Hollywood magic. You never know what's going to happen, and I've stunt doubled a little, and you know, I've wrangled. I've done, you know, anything that you do on a film set's fun to me. But I've never quit my day job. You know, I've gotten to do extra work in really big films, and I've gotten to do speaking stuff on small films. So it's all relative. They're all fun to me. You know, it's creativity, and it really has. You can stay sharp, memorizing dialogue and trying to get it right, and just auditioning for films. I've auditioned for a lot of films that I've seen on the big screen, and I know that part. I remember when I did that, and I nailed that audition. I just wasn't the right person.
What was the biggest one that you didn't get?
I guess there's one about the vice president. I guess last year, the year before, there's one about, I think it was Cheney or something, and I had a part in that I auditioned for, and I even cut my hair the same hairstyle for the audition, and everything was a virtual audition, and it was a really good part. It's just a couple lines in there, you know, but that was a big one. And I don't know, you know, there are a couple TV shows and things like that. I can't really say what the names of them were, you know, that I auditioned for, because I have to sign all those non-disclosure agreements. But we're all the actors are like it. I've got a really good agent named Linda McAllister in Dallas, and she's got a lot of good people that she had in the Academy Awards this year. She had one film with 4 actors in it. So she really does her job, but it's just they cast a wide net, and then they pick the person that's in their mind and matches what's in their mind.
Yeah.
And I'm, you know, when you get in your 60s, there are less roles for people like that.
I mean, hey, everybody needs a cowboy grandpa.
Yep, exactly. I've got, there's a music.
You probably need to be in Hallmark movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that would probably work.
There's a music video coming out from Cowtown Sounds where I'm the cowboy grandpa, and they filmed it at our place on the ranch.
Yeah, right.
And I got 2 girls playing the same granddaughter as she gets older. It's a cool music video. The lady that's singing was a backup singer for Merle Haggard, named Cheryl Rogers.
That's coming out soon.
It's supposed to come out. They actually had it all made, but then they're going to go through and re-edit it and color correct it and everything, make it a little better. Then when COVID hit, everybody took turns getting sick, so they'd start to working on it, and then they'd have to abandon it. But it's supposed to be coming out in the next couple of weeks, I hope.
So would you give up building saddles to act?
Probably at my age, yeah. It's a lot easier on your body. Right. So, and I like using my mind.
Yeah.
It's at some point you decide it's a little easier to use your mind than to use your fists.
True story.
Yeah.
So
the deal is that no matter what happens, there's always another door that opens, and you can't be scared to go through it, because, you know, it's just unintended. Stuff's unintended, and it just happens, and sometimes there's no reason for it, but, you know, you got to see what's on the other side of the door, because it might be pretty good.
Yeah, and that's what we found with a lot of the stuff that we're doing.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, I never pictured myself where I'm at and doing the things that we've been doing, and then, you know, we've talked about it, and, you know, I mean, we've become friends, good acquaintances, whatever, because I bounced a lot of ideas off of you with the stuff, because, you know, I mean, you're the famous guy that I know,
Well,
who's in the business.
Surely not.
Yeah. But you're in the business and you
Yeah.
understand, and so you're the one that I bounce ideas off of, and you're always honest with how it goes or how it doesn't go. And even though you do have me a little bit self-conscious right now because I do tend to say the word right a lot, and I'm trying to get away from that.
Yeah, that's good.
And so silence is golden. Hence, I'm sitting here.
We're practicing stillness,
yes,
is what they call
practicing stillness, yes. But I can't, from being in my point and watching what you're doing and delivering lines, and what do you have to go through in your head to where everything, when you're roping or building saddles becomes second nature, and then where you have to go to rehearse the lines and say it how they want it? Because, what makes this deal work for me with the interviews and the things that we're doing with the stories is I get to be me and just make up stuff and say what I want to say, however I say it, and I eventually get to the point. But I can't get my brain wrapped around, because as soon as I get lines and they say go, action, all the lines I forget. So
Well,
how do you do it?
You've got the improv part down, which we do a lot of that. If you go to an acting workshop, you'll do, one of the things you do is improv, like we're doing right now. And that's all it is, except somebody throws you a subject and you talk about it like you're two people in doing that.
Right.
And
shit, see what I mean?
Right.
I'm not very good at this game.
Right.
Jeez, don't say right, because you're gonna get me messed up again.
Okay. But the deal about the screen, the thing I did, which I did right, was when I started doing the extra work and I found out I really liked this. And I liked it because I liked doing it. Some people do extra work because they want to be around the stars, and you get to be around a bunch of really big stars. You get to eat lunch with them once in a while. But that's really can't be what you got to do. The acting like your horse training because you like doing it. And I was never able to, when I started roping, I couldn't afford to go to get a full-time trainer or somebody to coach me all the time, which kids do now. So I realized that's what I needed to do, and I went and I got an acting coach that was pretty well respected, and I stayed with him 2.5 years, more or less, in the Fort Worth area, and I did scenes. I learned I learned everything I could. He had other people come in that were really well-known actors, and we'd work with them, but it was just sort of a little once-a-week thing. But I really dedicated myself to getting better at that, and I left him and I went to Austin for a couple of years, and Terry, I don't know if you've ever seen Weekend at Bernie's. Bernie the carry around. This Terry Kaiser, he was my acting coach for 2 years. Great guy, and I couldn't do those 3-hour drives every week, but he'd block it to where when he had something, what he did was he'd have a scene, lay it out, then you'd get to work on it, and then you'd film it with 2 cameras. And I was already doing, voice stuff in films by then, but it was really good. He were out there on a high wire with Terry because he didn't care what you did, and there was some stuff that was unbelievable that people were doing in this class and stuff. But that really helped me so much, and just his encouragement. And I got an agent, which I mentioned before. So what's going through my mind when I have to remember the lines is, first of all, people say you have to know the lines. You actually do have to memorize the lines. And when you get that piece of paper, if you're auditioning, you get 3 pages. Somebody at my level does, because I'm auditioning for 3-page parts. And you have to know all the dialogue. You have to know the other person, yours, the different tricks for memorizing it. At the same time, you also have to build up through different methods what that person's like. You need to know the story. You have to go into the story and visualize it. So for all these things, you have to have imagination. You have to really be there. And so you have to memorize it. Then you have to really understand that person and kind of slip into their skin and try to, even if you don't know what the real backstory is, because they don't show you all that, you have to make up your own backstory so you're real. Some people do it. Matthew McConaughey writes 4 pages on every character when he goes in for an audition. But I don't really go to those lengths. But I'm not getting paid like that either. I've got other jobs. But you have to kind of know how that person would react. And then when you go in there, if you make a mistake, if you're that person, you might say the line's a little off, but they're still true. and you just keep rolling. You have to learn to keep rolling. But you have to know what the other person's saying. You have to look at them. You have to really hear them say it to you. You can't just say they go and then you say your line. You have to know what they're saying, and you have to respond to it like you're the person. And you can't make up a big game plan ahead of time. So you have to be there, and it's tough, especially with a lot of dialogue. The first I went to one audition when I started out, and it was a great story. It was some kind of crime deal, and this character that I auditioned for had a monologue, and I got down to about the third line, and I messed it up, and I started thinking, what was that I said? So I messed up the fourth line, and I said, wait a minute, well, what? And then I was back. I didn't know where I was. Yeah. And they said, we've got time. There's nothing like sitting with 6 people and the camera rolling. So we've got time. Take all the time you need. And I'm trying now. It's just like, and I got out of that, and I felt so bad about it, and I went home, and I just put this thing away, and it was the only audition I've ever really tanked. I've had a couple that I didn't think were as good because I didn't fit the deal, but I never tanked another one after that I don't think I did. So before before Terry Kaiser became my acting coach, I met him on they were shooting a little TV show up in Fort Worth, a detective TV show, and he was on it, and that's where I met him. And he knew a couple of people I knew, and they liked me. They've been in some classes with me. So he was getting ready to open his acting school down there, and he went to one of the big studios and rented a theater, and he put on this thing to promote, because there's lots of acting teachers and a lot of acting business in Austin. Well, he promoted it big time, and he sent me an invitation to come down and perform anything I wanted to. He needed like a handful of people to perform. So I decided I was going to go down there with this audition that I messed up. And I got there, and I'm in a packed theater. I've never been in a packed theater before. I was in a theater with all these people, pretty much my peers, all come to see what Terry's deal was like. So I got up there, and I had it down, and I did a pretty good job. And then he got up there, and he started helping me, and I did it again, and it was really, really good. It was magic. And he always, whenever he did something like that with him, he'd give you a poker chip like the first time. So I still got my poker chip from him. And but that's kind of what you go through. And after that, I've done pretty good. My auditions, you have to have a thick skin. You have to walk away at the end of them. You don't worry about what they think. You can't even, they wouldn't ask you in. They look at all your resume and what you've done in your demo reel. So they wouldn't ask you in if they didn't think you could do it, but they go through 25, 50 people and narrow it down to 10, and they call them back to look at them again. And they're all sweating because they can't make the wrong decision, and they want to find that person. And it's a lot of pressure.
A lot of that, just like sometimes it's hard to remember the raining pattern.
Oh yeah.
And so then 3 pages of dialogue is.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, it takes, but I think it keeps me sharp doing that. It's if you're working on memorizing something like that, it's good for you whether you make any money off it or you get the part. To me, it's just the mental discipline of doing that. And it's hard sometimes. And then before I do it, we do a lot of virtual auditions, and I'll do them, over and over again. I'll read it, I'll get it down, and then I'll tape myself a couple times while I'm working on something else, just going through it. And then when I really do it, it's still hard when you actually tape it. I get more and more to tape for the first one than going in and do it in person. And you can still, when you get up there, you can just forget something, or something's just not right, or you mess up the words, and you hate to do that when you're taping at your own place. So yeah, it takes a little mental discipline, and it's not the easiest. I've known good actors. I've acted with good actors that couldn't remember their lines when they got in the deal, and that's hard when you're on point and they start forgetting lines, and nobody wants to tell them that they forgot a line or they messed it up. It throws you off because you want to say the next line that went with what they were going to say, and all of a sudden you're thinking, should I say it? Should I jump ahead?
You just keep rolling with it?
You always try to keep rolling, because usually, and if they're filming something like this, if you make a mistake, they can always edit it, and they always shoot it more than once. There's less pressure doing something like this when you're making a movie than there is doing the audition to get ready for it. Because when you do this, you have to know all the dialogue, but they'll change something. They'll say, well, that line doesn't work. Can you say this? Or maybe a little more like that. And they'll change it, and they still shoot the whole scene. You have to know a whole scene's worth of dialogue, but you're under less pressure, and people forget lines, and you just kind of keep rolling with it.
That's the beauty of what we do, right?
Yeah.
You screw it up, we just leave the screw ups in,
Yep.
and we just roll on with it.
Yeah.
It's way easier. We don't have to memorize anything.
Yeah. Put the little black thing over our mouths if we say something bad.
Because Paul knows whenever he films me, he can't tell me to say it twice. Right? We get one take. I'm like the one take wonder.
That's the way a lot of people are.
Right or wrong, that's it. I mean, and that's why I think I'd be a terrible actor. Because if you're like, I don't like that word, take it back and change it. I wouldn't remember the 37 words that came in front of it.
Yeah.
Because all I'm thinking is about the one word that I got to replace.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm out. So I have respect. I have respect
thank
for
you.
it.
I respect the guys up above me that can do a whole movie.
It's just the talent, and I always like, because I enjoy music. I'm not musically talented at all. I can play the radio, but when you think about it, there's only so many words in the human language, right? And how that they can be put in different contexts, and you get all these different things, and same thing with the music, right? There's only so many notes, but a lot of these the songs and the music is not the same, and it's just always blown me away that's what is what can come of it. Because I'm sure when you're roping or you're training, people, how did you do that with that cold? And you just know. And I have to imagine that this is kind of the same concept. Is that right? Whenever you're writing these plays and you're doing the dialogue, and you just know. Yeah,
like I said, it's imagination. Horse training, you've got to have a little bit of imagination to figure out when you're laying awake at night what to do next. But with these arts like writing and acting, you have to have an overactive imagination. That a lot of actors probably can do a lot of other jobs because they do have that. Sometimes I think that can hinder you a little bit, maybe too much thinking. And you can get lost in a lot of actors that you can go down the rabbit hole too far, and there's types of acting that can cause that because you become too much of the person. The way I was taught, you learn the circumstances and the story you're telling, and it's like make-believe. Well, what if I was this person? But some great actors that became the person, but then they couldn't unbecome them afterwards, and they drug up their own bad memories to, when they had to crying for the simplification, but say for crying they thought of the same bad thing every time they shot something. Well, people go to psychiatrists for years to forget that stuff, and here you have people that are dredging it up because they can, and it makes their performances powerful. But then they can't put that back in the box if they do it too much. And that's why you see actors that resort to drugs and things like that, or just get lost because they got into that too much. And who says whether it's right or wrong? Some of them had some powerful performances.
Yeah. I can't imagine that, how you go that deep into it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think it's that when we're riding horses, because I say you've ridden a lot of horses. I mean, you learn to shut it off, and you end up having that discipline, right? Because when you ride the one and he took advantage of you and stuff didn't go the way, you can't take it out on the next one. And the same thing like with forgetting. And I like to think that maybe that's why my memory is like it is, because you go show one and this is what the pattern is, and literally 10 minutes later you're on the next horse with a different pattern, and everything's completely different. So you develop that skill of how you just get past it, right? And you go down the fence in a cow horse deal, or you're in a big wreck, and that's how you get paid. So the next run, you just have to tuck that stuff way down there, and you go on and do it again. So I think you develop that kind of, forgetfulness, or you can compartmentalize it,
right?
And
that's a good word
but when you come into the acting part of it, I mean, I just couldn't imagine like if I brought all that crap that I've got tucked down in there and hid away and bring it out.
It's
and
a
make
tough
it
deal
work.
to do that.
Yeah,
it's better to find. And like I said, the people that I studied with didn't recommend that, but some people do.
Right.
There are different ways to get to the same point, but who's to say what's the best way?
Yeah. Do you have any aspirations on hitting Yellowstone?
Well, I'd like to. Taylor Sheridan's doing a lot of, and maybe he's even listening to this. Who knows?
I hope, of course. I mean, who isn't listening to Global Horse Network?
Yep, exactly right. And he's got a lot of projects in development down here, but he's doing a lot of other stuff. I've met him he's a really nice guy, good speaker, and he's got a really good background, which is why Yellowstone is so successful. He's got a good background in ranching and that. I like, those of us that like Westerns and stuff, that's our dream, because there aren't that many Westerns, and he's actively producing them. But it's just one of those things. You never know what'll happen. Like I said, you never know what email's going to come, or there are lots of other things going too. I mean, I'd just as soon if something came up that wasn't even a Western, that's fine with me. I mean, I like the hat and the boots, and that's kind of my lifestyle. But at Dallas, I had to learn how to dress like a businessman, because first time I showed up there, I was supposed to be an upscale businessman in this fancy hotel and restaurant, and they reworked me pretty fast. I lost the hat, the boots. I had a nice suit, so I got to keep that. But this lady said, "What are your pants so long for?" So after a couple episodes, I kind of watched those guys and learned from them. I learned how to dress like a Dallas businessman, because we're used to putting on a suit and tie and a hat. It's a whole different wardrobe. So
now the whole Yellowstone, because we're talking about that, and I know they're doing the other deal. I don't know what the name of it is going to be with the 4/6s, right?
That's going to be awesome.
Do you think that's kind of going to be the resurrection of the horse biz? When you look now with the fact of horse prices are pretty high, horses are selling well at the horse sales, and it seems like a lot more people are wanting to get into it, whether it's because of COVID, right? People's had a lot of downtime, and they're looking, kind of maybe reevaluating their life and their plans and being able to do stuff like that. Or do you think that just that TV show, that there's just so many people that are watching it that they're getting bitten by that bug?
Well, I think it's promising, and there's no telling what people will do all the time, but the whole wave that the AQHA rode through the 60s and 70s and 80s, that was all created by people that were kids watching Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, and grew up and they wanted to have a horse, and then they wanted to be a cowboy. And that drove the youth activity program in the 60s and 70s, and that in turn drove the amateur program. And both of those programs created something for horse trainers to do besides futurities. So that whole thing was really important. And then in the 70s, we started going spaghetti. We were getting into spaghetti westerns, experimental westerns, and finally they just got too expensive to make, and they died out except for the occasional western. And we talked earlier that kids have gotten away from, they got into science fiction, Star Trek, Star Wars, those different things for maybe a generation. So they brought them further away from the cowboy horse deal. And now there are more things like video gaming and stuff that they're into. That's how and their heroes, I don't know what the heroes are, but they're sort of into those games for recreation, so they don't have the role model. So back to your question, I think anybody that produces a western that's actually seen by a lot of people, that could create the people. And Yellowstone's sort of an adult show, so I look at directly influencing maybe people that are in their early 20s or that want to do an outdoor lifestyle. It all starts with you making that trip to the rental stable and riding a horse for the first time. That's the way it started with a lot of us. But the other thing Yellowstone's going to do is it's going to create a lot of interest in Hollywood and places where people have money of doing something just like Yellowstone. But that's what you do in the film business. You always say I'm going to make Star Trek. Well, Star Trek started out as a western. It was going to be like Wagon Train, but it was going to be set in the stars. And I think it was Lucille Ball that really pushed it to get it through. That's kind of an unusual deal, but so people are going to start saying, well, I want to make it just like Yellowstone with the cowboy hats and the real cowboys and stuff, but I want to do this. If we get that and we get some more family-oriented stuff too, we get different stuff for all age groups, I think that a lot of people, being exposed to that is going to create people that want to go ride a horse. Like I said, the whole thing is getting that spark first time, getting them on a horse.
Yeah, I mean, even though, Yellowstone is geared towards, adults.
Yeah.
I think, if mom and dad can get the bug, then the kids are going to go with it. And like you said, from the 70s, you've taken, this group has worked their way up through the AQHA, and now, they're getting into the twilight years where they're wanting to retire and do things, but we don't have that same group of people coming back in on the other end with the kids.
And that's a problem for everybody in the horse industry. It doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah, it would be maybe what you need to focus on is writing a story or a series that goes back and gets the kids involved with it. Because all these, with mine, because mine are 8 and 9 years old, they watch all these kids on TV, and they're city kids doing all these other things, and I always thought maybe that's something we need to collaborate on, is that we do it where it's set with those kids and the ranching. The ranching lifestyle with growing up and beating each other with sticks and riding ponies and playing cowboys and Indians and the things that maybe that's not PC anymore. Maybe we don't need to see cowboys and Indians. But anyway,
I don't know.
but we'll then go back and learn, because that's, I think, from a business standpoint, and I could be wrong, but is the grandparents who are the ones who have the money, who grew up in that era, want to see their grandkids come back to that lifestyle, because I think everybody's to the point where they start to get fed up with iPads and the internet, and they just want to go back to living and doing things like they did when they were a kid, and maybe that's the example.
Well, there are people that try to do that, and there are these film festivals. There are 2 now that I know of. They're all just westerns. And I've written a screenplay for one of them, but it sure wasn't a family one, unfortunately. It was a horror western. It was pretty gruesome, but I did pretty well with it. I did that for me, just for fun. But they're probably a majority of the stuff that you see that is family-oriented stuff that they're trying to get going. But again, it gets back to the money. Somebody that actually has the money has to see that you can make money with that, and then they'll put the money in it, and then the whole cycle starts. And Yellowstone may be the catalyst for that kicks that off, but until somebody, how expensive it is to really produce a movie or something, until somebody wants to put the money into it. And a lot of the people that are doing the family stuff want to redo the Roy Rogers shows and stuff like that, and that's fine, but the people the grandparents are the ones that grew up on Roy Rogers, not the kids.
Right.
And, people are kind of jaded. You need to approach it with something new. Because you can't just redo the whole thing about films and Hollywood. The trick is to reinventing the same thing to where it looks new and different. Otherwise, it's the same story over and over again.
Well, again, not to keep beating the Tyler Sheridan deal, but you end up having, he did the Run for the Million and all. So then you have in Vegas. How many of these shows have you been to where it's sold out, right? And there's a line standing to get in.
Oh, it did.
And
that was great for the reining industry.
Yeah, and I know people badmouth him about it, and and all the stuff that goes with it.
I thought it was fantastic.
And but it's good for the business, and I see where some people maybe can complain, because you have to have a certain level of horse to be there, and it doesn't really. Right now they're not seeing the benefit of it, but the benefit ends up being is that those more people get into it, then that's more money that trickles down to everybody.
And people are just short-sighted. They see their immediate goals. What can I go for that prize this week? No, but you may get 10 new customers because they want to try reining next week. So people can be pretty short-sighted, but I think that's tremendous. And what I heard was some of the stuff about some of the guys where they said lines or things that they thought weren't real, and the whole dramatic situation that was set up, but that's reality. TV isn't real.
Right.
And it worked for the Kardashians. It's time for it to work for the Cowboys. Yeah. So you have to create something. People don't want to see a History Channel documentary on everything. If you make cowboys and horses like that, they're going to get bored. But when they see you have to have conflict to create a story. So when they see Taylor's deal on on the Rainers and this conflict, and it's exciting. It's like we were saying, that's how professional wrestling developed and got a really good fan following. They weren't trying to be politically correct. These guys get up there when the guy get out of the ring, the other guy accused him of sleeping with his wife, and he hit him with a chair. Yeah. And that's how they promoted him, all these fictitious characters, basically. They all get on the wrestling bus and go home together.
How fun would that be when you rock out of the pen after you just marked a 230, and then you have Matt Mills knock Fapani off with a chair?
Well,
that would be news.
I think if he used a breakaway chair, it would really be good, and you'd have people talking about next morning.
that one thing would just set it over the top for sure.
So if you guys are listening and you want to get really get your ratings boosted, it's a breakaway chair.
Yeah. That's the beauty, right? It's what you think it is. is not necessarily
No.
that, right? I mean, it's the, the beauty of, like we say, the set, not even really a kitchen.
Yep. It isn't.
Well, I mean, it is a kitchen, but it's not really
Where'd
a
the
kitchen.
coffee come from then?
Well, from the other kitchen.
Oh, okay.
So, well, I hope you have anything that you want to end on.
No, I
Give
really-
somebody some kind of an inspirational story. Make somebody feel good before we wrap this up.
Well, I don't know. We've sort of covered all that. I hope I really enjoyed you having me. I've had more fun today than I've had in a year during the apocalypse. So this is really good.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that I'm better than a pandemic.
Yep, exactly. Right? And I think I've talked more than I have in a year. So I really enjoyed that. I think what you're doing is really good, and bringing the human interest side of horses to horse people and to people that might be interested in horses, because those are the ones we've got to get interested, are the people that are sort of on the fringe and they think it's cool, but it's sort of a lifestyle they could never relate to.
For me, the cool thing has always been, and you probably know it from the acting side of things, is that those actors are people, right? The Western people and the horse trainers are just people. Everybody gets up and they put their boots and pants on the same, and they go ride horses, and they go do the things that it is. And you always see the button down and the hat and that part of the stuff, but that's only a fraction of the life.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's a lot of ball caps and hoodies and dirty clothes and cleaning stalls and feeding and doing all those things, and you just get to see the nice shiny part that's out on the end. And what I wanted to do with the horse stories and the things we're doing with the interviews is, I mean, you're known for saddles and all the stuff, but to me it's way cooler on the acting side of things, because that lets people see the other side of what you're doing, rather than just you build saddles. And so we've tried to do that with everybody and make it relatable, that look, he did that, and he grew up in the up in the Northeast and moved to Texas and made all this stuff happen, and it was not necessarily the path that you planned on going down.
No,
but here you are.
Rarely it is for anybody. I think my inspirational thing would be something I stole it from somebody else. If he's watching, he'll probably know it. But I think the key to a good life is never saying no. Say yes. I mean, obviously, if they want you to jump off a bridge and that's going to be you're going to be toast, I wouldn't say that. But in general, try going through that door that you might not have gone through, and it may be a little uncomfortable, but you might find something you really like. You can always come back if you don't.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, life is life is a highway.
Yeah.
Right? And you just got to go do it and figure out what works. It's the stuff that we've done with the horse stories and pushing that part of it. And I mean, maybe is it not? Maybe people need it. Maybe people don't need it. But it's what we've done, because it's something that I wanted to make sure that we brought, was the stories of the older generations who were going to lose those stories and know why they did the things that they did, not knowing that oh, you just won this. Well, that's cool, but how did you get there? And why did you make the decisions that you made? And to me, that's what makes it cool, and what makes everybody human and relatable. And everybody's got a story, and the choices that they made were dictated and directed by something else that happened. And you set off to be a roper, and you did all this stuff, and maybe you end up winning an Oscar or an Academy Award, right? You know what I mean? But the thing is, you don't know where that path's gonna go, because you just went down and embraced all the pieces that came with it. And I think that's the beauty of it, is kind of believe in yourself and do what you want to do, and don't take everything so serious.
Right.
I mean, you
enjoy the journey.
Yeah, enjoy the journey.
It's not just the Oscar or the World Championship. Those things, if people can get too obsessed on the goal, which you should have goals, but it's a journey, because when you look back, that's the good stuff, the journey. Right.
I remember in Craig Johnson, I think one day we were talking, and we were talking about how everybody has goals and doing things, and he said, "You know who won the Reigning Horse Fraternity in 1986?" I'm like, "I have no clue." He's like, "Exactly, because nobody gives a shit." Right? Turned out, I think Craig won it in '86, right? But the thing ends up being is that nobody cares, right? Because That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, when you think about what the importance is of it, I mean, who won the Brandon Horse Fraternity a few years ago, or who won, you know, the NFR and the tie down roping in 1998?
Yeah.
Nobody knows. I mean, so that's your personal goal and your achievements, and you do it, and it's a great thing. But you know, everybody's on their journey, and I like to learn from everybody and make it better. So even though you've given me some kind of a subconscious thing with the word right that I'm trying to get over, and you know, it just is gonna mess with me for a long time. At least you're truthful.
Just say you know instead of right.
And then I go back to, because I used to say you know, and I had to change it, so I got out of one and picked up the other, right? So it's either or.
Everybody's got tails. You just have to learn to live with them.
Right. See, there we go. Right. Again, I'll never get over it. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the interviews with Nick Pernokas, saddle maker extraordinaire. Look him up on the internet if you want to find more info on him. I'm sure you can Google him. We just wanted to give you a kind of behind the scenes glimpse of all the cool things that he's done and kind of what's brought him into where he's at today in the world. So I want to appreciate you for stopping by and hanging out with us today. And you know, as always, I'm Steve Kutie. Ride hard, be safe, and have fun.